A new survey from the Pew Research Center found that the top concerns of Black Americans are crime, the economy, and housing. Newsweek contributor Denise argues that the Biden administration has failed on all three of these issues. But it's not just President Biden and VP Harris. Democrats at large, including the Congressional Black Caucus, have failed Black America for generations.
Here to discuss is Max Alvarez, editor-in-chief of The Real News, and Newsweek's contributor Denise Long. Welcome to the show to you both. Denise, so what do you think? I mean, since you're the one that kind of issued the criticism, I mean, I think many of us agree with you. Crime is up. The economy doesn't look so great. Housing is very difficult, and pricing, the prices are outrageous for most people. So what would you recommend? What would be your solutions to this? Like, what could the Biden administration do better?
Yeah, so good morning. Part of it is, I think, for both Democrats and Republicans, is recognizing the similarities that Black Americans have, categorical similarities of Black American primary concerns and the larger part of America, but also recognizing the nuance of that, right? So when you think about Black Americans who live in an urban environment and more of a multifamily type of living situation, and Black Americans who live in single family housing situations, I think for the Biden administration, I know that what free people are looking for in many ways is a push for living wages, just like all Americans, but also really recognizing the ways the system of lending, the system of employment has discriminated against Black Americans for generations to present day, and how that has contributed to some of the wealth inequality that makes these issues so salient in Black American life. So in many ways, Black Americans are looking for Biden to act on HR 40, not in its current iteration, because it's mostly a study, and the way it's being structured by those who are leading it won't lead to what free people are looking for. But those things are important, and reparations is important to addressing the issues and putting wealth back into the pockets of the people who it's been taken from and stolen from.
Now, Max, there has been a lot of attention paid to the fact that Donald Trump got a historically large hunk of the Black vote in terms of recent elections, specifically the Black male vote. And of course, many more Latinos than folks expected voted for Donald Trump, given the nature of a lot of his comments, especially early in his 2016 campaign. What do you make of the success with those groups and the continued gap between the level of Latino inroads that have been made by Republicans in the 30% versus 18% of Black men, I think it was, in single digits of Black women, I think it was about 8%. To what do you attribute that gap?
Well, I mean, I guess this is a squishy answer, but it's a number of things, right? But I think there's actually something worthwhile to kind of unpack there, right? Because I think, as every one of us here has probably said more times than we can count, Black people, Latino people are not monoliths, right? We are human beings who have our own lives and our own particular circumstances that we care about. We are also part of a society and have shared concerns and so on and so forth. There's always a bit of a negotiation between those individual localized concerns, the communities with which you identify, the ideologies that you hold, so on and so forth. Again, that may seem basic as hell, but it's something that we always conveniently forget whenever, particularly in mainstream media or in the kind of political consultancy class, we are trying to understand these trends, and then we get stuff like Hillary Clinton saying she carries hot sauce with her, right? Or any
that was apparently true,
which is great, but it's saying so as an appeal to the Black vote is kind of or what was
Cringe.
it, Tia Hillary, or your abuela, so you end up getting these really dumb, reductive sort of cosplaying attempts to appeal to very diverse, groups of people. And you're largely missing kind of the point of what's driving people's politics. So the reason that I say that is because one thing that I recall very distinctly as a Latino who grew up very Catholic, very conservative, in the era when, folks on the radio like Larry Elder were speaking to people like me, and were speaking against what they saw as the sort of rising Democratic hegemony of what would come to be called identity politics. There is something in that message that is very appealing to people of color, to, I imagine, Black communities and individuals as well, because what folks like Larry said at that time was that the left wants you to be a victim. The left wants you to be a number in this sort of larger, quote unquote, kind of oppressed community, but yet they're squashing your individuality, right? And so there was an extra component there as a right-wing, person of color, where voting a certain way was a way to sort of claim my individuality. It was a way to claim my independence. It was a way to say, I am not going with the crowd that expects me to be a Democrat. I am a free individual, free-minded person who is making my own choice in voting, Republican and stuff like that. So there is an additional kind of component that is part of our want and need to be seen as individuals, and to express that individuality by kind of bucking the sort of political trends that we're hearing about in the media or not. Does that make sense? Does that resonate, Denise or Bree or Kim, with y'all?
Yeah, so I'd say for me, in thinking about writing the piece as a multi-generational Black American, seventh gen descendant of slaves, plus all the other stuff that's a part of who I am and my makeup, is there are ways that I think Democrats do indeed need non-white people to be dependent upon them. Right? There are ways that they boogeyman the Republican Party, and Black people end up thinking that they can't go to party meetings, that Republicans don't want them in the party, that everybody who's a Republican is racist, who is not Black, and every Black person who's a Republican is, you've heard the language. I don't usually use it, but they're a coon, they're a sellout, and all of that kind of stuff. And there are ways that the left feeds those narratives in order to keep their base, right? There are ways that they talk about voting rights as if our constitutional right to vote is up for reauthorization every generation when it is not. So they lack clarity on exactly what it is they're looking to reauthorize. And I think that's very intentional. It creates a situation where the left feels like daddy, right? And the right feels like the boogeyman that daddy is protecting you from. And so that is why I feel that addressing the racial inequality, both from policy, but also by repairing the harm that American policies have created to the Democratic base, which is Black Americans, freed people whose ancestors were slaves, comprise 80% of Black Americans. Reparations would absolutely decimate the Democratic base and the need for people to continually rely on their protection of the social safety net, their protection from the boogeymen who are on the right, who want small government. I want small government too. However, our government has done a lot to damage freed people, Black Americans, and they need to do a lot to fix that. And when we're there, the landscape of Democrats and Republican Party will change significantly. And I think Democrats know that, and reparations is a threat to their base. And that's why they're not doing it, which is why I call for Republicans to see that and to fix it. Not to mention the reason the GOP has its name as the Gallant Old Party, because it was deeply committed to the needs of freed people post-emancipation.
So Denise, I'm inclined to agree with you that there are gains to trade here, that Republicans could make a bid for Black voters, that the Democratic Party hasn't done nearly enough to serve Black voters, especially given what a loyal voting base it has been. But in your article, you point to the kinds of things Republicans can do. You're talking about reparations now. You talk about stopping vilifying 1619 and saying it can be both 1619 and, historically validated over time dates, and to not play these kind of culture war games. Of course, that is the opposite of what they're doing. And it's not just that the Democratic Party has painted the Republican Party as a boogeyman. As you just mentioned, the Republican Party has had no problem painting itself in those terms and using a kind of race baiting rhetoric, classically saying we used to be able to say inward, and now we just use all these other epithets to get away with the same kind of rhetoric that we used back in the 50s. Do you see it as plausible that the Republicans would see this opportunity and take this kind of heel turn, given the kinds of things they are focusing on now to win?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point that you're making, because I had this conversation the other day in regard to this. There are many, many politicians out here, and we should be asking ourselves, who is getting the mic and who is elevated to a position of legitimacy as a spokesperson for the party. So those who are fighting CRT, for example, which is a euphemism for anything that we're not ready to accept, right? I think part of those of us in the populace who are Republican, who are right-leaning, who are left-leaning, need to really call out those people and the party leadership. Do I see it as plausible? We don't have another choice. Are we to continue to let the extremes drive the narrative of what is acceptable? The extremes drive the narrative of who the party is and what the party is. I am a Republican officially, right? I am not the same, and I would not lead the same as DeSantis, for example, when it comes to things like CRT and the like. And so I think there are ways that we have to reclaim our political institution, and we have to delegitimize those who aren't willing, right, to compromise and come to the table to get things done. Now, how do we do that? We do that by voting, but what are the other ways that we can put pressure on calling the governor's mansion, on, writing letters to the president, on talking to media about who they choose to elevate of all the people in Congress, right? The 500 some odd people. Why is it only that some people are continually in the news cycle? Why aren't media, for example, elevating the voices and needs of the people and marginalizing those people who are continuing to put us in this cycle of polarization? So it falls on all of us, including our institutions, media being a part of it.
Well, I blame CNN Plus. Thank you both, Max and Denise, for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising after this.